Hashtag the child of silence. After giving birth, my unfaithful husband refused to sign the birth certificate. That bastard is scum. He doesn't deserve my last name, he shouted, humiliating me in front of his entire wealthy family. But he turned pale and began to tremble when the doctor. They say the worst pain isn't physical. It's the kind that breaks you from the inside while everyone watches, judges, and applauds your downfall. And that was exactly what Lucy experienced. Lucy was 26 years old. She worked at a small community library on the outskirts of Boston. She had always been a woman of quiet character, reserved, somewhat shy, but with a sweetness that filled any room. Despite her humble origins, she had earned the affection of those who knew her through her dedication, honesty, and that peculiar way of speaking softly, as if she didn't want to bother anyone. She fell in love with Stephen Whitmore when she was just 22. He, heir to a prestigious family fortune, crossed into her life like a hurricane disguised as a gentle breeze. Stephen had bearing, a charming smile, and words that sounded like promises. Promises that over time became threats disguised as silence. That public hospital with the smell of cheap disinfectant and the echo of newborn cries was the scene of the beginning of a nightmare no one saw coming. Lucy had been in labor for more than 8 hours alone, hands gripping the sheets and her heart in pieces. Her mother, terminally ill, couldn't be present. Her neighborhood friends had no way to get there. And Stephen arrived when it was all over. The room was small, with worn walls and a white light that hurt the eyes. Lucy held her baby, still with swollen eyes from crying so much. When the door opened, Stephen entered dressed in designer clothes, hair perfectly combed, as if he'd come from an elegant dinner. Behind him, his mother, Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, with a haughty look and gesture of contempt, and his younger sister, Natalie, who looked at Lucy as if she were seeing a cockroach on the living room carpet. "You're late," Lucy murmured, barely with strength, holding the little one in her arms. Stephen didn't respond. He took one step, then another, until his gaze fell on the baby. He stopped dead, frowned. Something in his face transformed. It was no longer just discomfort, it was anger, cold, calculating, poisoned. "What is this?" he said without raising his voice, but with an intensity that froze the blood in the room. Lucy looked at him confused. "It's your son, Stephen. Our son." Mrs. Margaret stepped forward decisively and positioned herself beside her son. She looked at him, then at the child. Her lips curved with disdain. "That's not a Whitmore." Natalie let out a brief laugh, between nervous and mocking. "Lucy, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything." Lucy began to tremble. "The baby is yours, Stephen." "I." But Stephen was no longer listening. He turned toward the nurse who had just entered to check vital signs. "I need to speak with the hospital director. I'm not signing any birth certificate. That bastard doesn't carry my name." The words fell like knives into Lucy's body. The nurse, visibly uncomfortable, tried to leave the room. Lucy clung to the baby. Her eyes filled with tears, not from humiliation, but from the pain growing in her chest like a bomb about to explode. "How can you say that? He's your son, Stephen. Look at me, please," she begged with a broken voice. Stephen looked at her for the first time since he'd entered. Not as before, not as a husband, but as if she were a complete stranger. "Do you think I'm stupid? That child doesn't look anything like me. Do you think I'm going to carry the burden of a mistake that doesn't even belong to me? He's not a mistake. He's your son. Don't raise your voice at me," he shouted, pointing his finger at her. "What you did is unforgivable. You have no idea what you've just caused." Mrs. Margaret crossed her arms and approached Lucy with a look full of contempt. "I always knew you were an opportunist. A poor girl trying to climb the social ladder with a full belly. And look at you now, you don't even know who the father is." "Shut up," Lucy shouted, trembling with rage. "You have no idea what you're saying. Don't speak to my mother like that." Stephen slammed the wall with his palm. "And what you did is unforgivable. You messed with my family, Lucy." The baby began to cry, a loud cry, as if he felt the tension, as if he knew something wasn't right in that place. Lucy cradled him, trying to calm him while falling apart inside. The noise attracted a doctor who entered with a worried expression. It was Dr. Martinez who had delivered the baby. Tall, with gray at his temples and tired eyes, he stopped seeing the scene. "Is everything okay here?" "Of course not," Stephen snapped. "This woman stuck me with a child that isn't mine. I want proof. I won't allow false paternity to be attributed to me." The doctor looked at Lucy, then at the child. He paused for a long time, took a deep breath. "Mr. Whitmore, I need to speak with you privately. I have nothing to discuss. I'm clear. That child isn't mine. I'm not interested in hearing more. Please, the doctor insisted. It's important. Stephen ignored him, crossed his arms, and turned to his mother. We're leaving. Let her handle her problem alone. Lucy tried to get up, but the pain from childbirth made her fall back against the bed. Don't leave, please. Listen to me. Stephen. Mrs. Margaret approached one last time. I hope you have a good story to tell that child when he asks who his father was. And they left. Natalie cast one last look. No compassion, no hate, just emptiness. The doctor closed the door carefully and approached the bed. Lucy was destroyed. The baby, still crying, clung to his mother's warmth. Lucy, the doctor said, lowering his voice. I need you to be strong. What I'm going to tell you isn't easy. She lifted her tear-soaked face. What's wrong? The doctor paused. He looked at the baby, then at her. The reason Stephen noticed something strange makes sense. The baby has a genetic condition that isn't compatible with his, but not with yours either. Lucy blinked, confused. What are you saying? We need to do more tests, but Lucy... The father of the child appears to be someone close to Stephen. Very close. Lucy frowned. Her heart skipped a beat. No, that can't be. I wasn't with anyone else. Never. The doctor got up uncomfortably and headed toward the door. I'll tell you with more certainty once I have the lab results. For now, rest, you're going to need it. And he left the room. Lucy was left alone in silence. The baby's crying became softer. The pain in her belly was bearable, but what was in her soul was another kind of wound. One that still had no name, no cure, no end. She didn't know that hell was just beginning. Nor did she imagine that the truth she was about to discover was worse than any lie. ## Chapter 2, The Weight of Truth. Lucy couldn't move. She felt as if all the weight of the world had fallen on her chest. The silence in the room was so dense it could be cut with a sigh. The doctor had already left. Stephen had abandoned her, and her son, little Matthew, slept on her chest with the innocence of one who doesn't yet know contempt. Hours passed like shadows dragging through dawn. Lucy didn't close her eyes once. She stared at the ceiling without understanding what had just happened. She repeated to herself over and over that it couldn't be true, that it was all a nightmare, that the pain would stop, but no. The pain clung to her chest like a rusty knife. And the worst part wasn't the humiliation, it was the doubt. The doctor's words echoed in her head like a cursed echo. An incompatible genetic condition. How could that be? She had never been unfaithful to Stephen. Not a look, not a caress to another man ever. And yet there was her son being rejected by everyone, even by his own father, or the one she believed to be his father. At dawn, the nurse entered with a tired expression. She brought a breakfast tray and a form. Lucy, honey, you need to sign this document for discharge. Do you have someone who can come for you? Lucy shook her head. I don't have anyone. The nurse sighed with that silent compassion that only those who have seen too many tragedies have. You can stay a few more hours, but the hospital doesn't have space. When you can, you'll have to leave. Lucy nodded, then looked at her son. I don't have anywhere to take him. 2 days later, she returned to the small neighborhood where she had grown up. Dirt streets, tin roofs, the smell of humidity, and simple stews that filled the air with nostalgia. There waited the little house inherited from her mother, in ruins with broken windows and no running water. Lucy entered with Matthew in her arms and took a deep breath. It wasn't a mansion, but at least no one would judge her inside. She thought about crying, but she had no tears left. At the Whitmore mansion, meanwhile, everything was tension. Stephen had called Dr. Martinez to demand explanations. What do you mean by incompatible? Explain yourself clearly, he demanded, pacing back and forth in his office with whiskey in hand and a burning look. The doctor on the phone remained calm. Mr. Whitmore, I explained at the clinic. We detected an uncommon genetic condition. It matches a relative of yours, but not you. I suggest a DNA test as soon as possible. Stephen hung up without responding. Then he looked out the window. His face tensed. He began to suspect. The chauffeur who always smiled at him too much. The gardener who once asked about Lucy with curious tone. Even his own younger brother, Thomas, a 20-year-old who spent too much time at the house when he wasn't there. Mrs. Margaret entered at that moment, elegant with that air of superiority she never took off, not even to sleep. Well, I'm requesting a DNA test. I want to end this. I always knew that woman couldn't be trusted. It showed in her clothes, in the way she spoke. That class of women only serves to ruin family names. Stephen clenched his fists. I want everyone investigated. Everyone. I won't allow anyone to stain my name. Meanwhile, Lucy tried to survive. She had no milk for the baby. She had no diapers, and her savings account had been blocked. Stephen had eliminated her from everything, even health insurance. She went to the neighborhood supermarket to ask for credit, but no one wanted to help her. "Lucy, I'm sorry, but you already owe me from last month, and with what they're saying about you, I'd better not get into trouble," the store owner told her, looking down. Lucy left the business with her dignity in pieces, but just as she crossed the corner, an older woman called to her from the door of a house with rusty bars. "Hey Lucy, come here, girl. You and your baby look like you haven't eaten." It was Mrs. Martha, a lifelong neighbor, widow and mother of 7 children who no longer lived with her. She received her with a cup of hot tea, stale bread, and a look of affection that Lucy hadn't received in a long time. "I don't know what you may have done, but whatever it was, that baby isn't to blame, and you need help." Lucy broke down, crying for the first time since leaving the hospital. She cried like a little girl. She cried on the wooden table with Matthew sleeping on her legs and Mrs. Martha stroking her hair. "I don't understand," she whispered between sobs. "I swear to God I wasn't with anyone else. I don't know what's happening." That night, when she tried to sleep, she had a blurry memory. A fleeting but piercing image. A glass of wine, a strange dizziness. Stephen wasn't there. She only remembered being in the house. Then everything was fog. She tried to remember, but the sensation was like a muffled scream. Something didn't fit. The next day, the comments exploded on social media. Someone had leaked a photo of Stephen leaving the hospital with his mother and sister. The caption read, "Multimillionaire rejects his own son at birth." Opinions were divided. Some defended him, others crucified him, but everyone was talking. The press started snooping. A young journalist, Maria Garcia, tracked down Lucy. She knocked on Mrs. Martha's door 2 days later. "Are you Lucy Harrison?" Lucy hesitated but nodded. "I want to tell your story, but only if you want to. The country deserves to know the truth." Lucy didn't respond. She looked at her son. The world was cruel, but maybe telling her story was the only way to protect him. At the Whitmore mansion, Stephen received the DNA test results. He was alone. He opened the envelope with trembling hands, read. He stopped, read again. Negative. The baby wasn't his. He felt as if something inside him broke. It wasn't sadness, it was fury, raw rage. He called the notary and asked him to destroy the provisional birth certificate they had started. "That child died for me," he said as he threw the envelope into the fireplace. Hours later, at an elegant bar, Stephen was laughing with a blonde woman, young, perfectly made up. Her name was Camila. He was at a business party. No one mentioned Lucy, no one mentioned Matthew. Just drinks, false laughter, and bodies seeking to fill voids. Meanwhile, Lucy began her job search. With Matthew in her arms and a resume stained by rumors, she went through offices, bakeries, stores. Everyone said the same thing. "Sorry, we're not hiring." Night fell. She returned home exhausted, with swollen feet, with nothing more than a bag of rice that Mrs. Martha had given her. Upon entering, she found a letter under the door with no return address. It only said, "He wasn't the only one in that house who looked at you differently." Lucy felt a chill, looked at her son, hugged him tight, then closed the door and drew the curtains. There were too many shadows around her story, and she was just beginning to understand that behind every silence hid a secret. ## Chapter 3. Shadows of Memory. Lucy never slept peacefully again after receiving that anonymous letter. The phrase echoed in her head like a cursed echo. He wasn't the only one in that house who looked at you differently. She was afraid. Real fear. Not of ghosts or superstitions. Fear of what she remembered and what she didn't. Of what might have happened that night when everything became fog and the following days were covered in silence. The baby began to cry. Lucy hugged him. Matthew was barely weeks old, but his eyes seemed to look with the intensity of someone who had already lived 1,000 lives. She caressed his hair, sang softly to him. Then she sat on the edge of the broken bed in that house lent by neighbor Mrs. Martha, which had now become her only refuge. The world had left her alone, but time didn't stop. Neither did hunger. That same night she made a decision. She went out with Matthew wrapped in a thin blanket, crossed the neighborhood with her head held high, and went straight to an office building in the industrial zone. The place smelled of old sweat and cheap chlorine. She asked for the cleaning supervisor. "I need work. Whatever it is. I just ask that you let me bring my son with me." The boss looked at her with suspicion. "This isn't a daycare. He won't bother you. He'll sleep in a corner. I just need an opportunity." The woman sighed. She was tired and needed someone urgently. Fine, but if he cries too much, you're out. I don't want problems. That night, Lucy cleaned marble floors with swollen hands. Matthew slept in a box with a folded sheet as a mattress. Every time she finished mopping, she ran to check that he was breathing. Her body ached, but her dignity hurt more. With every corner she cleaned, she felt like she was erasing part of her story. She was no longer Stephen Whitmore's wife, she was nobody. Days passed. Matthew began showing strange symptoms. Labored breathing, constant fever, and small tremors in his hands. Lucy took him to a neighborhood medical clinic. The doctor, young and serious, examined him in silence. We need to do more comprehensive tests. This could be something more serious. Lucy looked at him with terror. More serious how? It could be a neurological or metabolic condition. I don't want to alarm you without proof, but there are signs we can't ignore. And how much do those tests cost? The doctor hesitated. 5,000, maybe 6. It all depends on what's needed. Lucy felt the air being ripped from her. She didn't have even 100. That night she didn't eat. She sold her only ring, the one Stephen had given her when he promised her a dignified life. She traded it for 2 cans of formula and 2 pounds of rice. The next day she went to the Municipal Legal Center, a room with walls full of moisture and stacked papers. She was attended by a young lawyer, Clara Gomez. She had dark circles under her eyes but bright eyes. She listened to her story without interrupting. I want to force my child's father to take responsibility. Clara took notes. Do you have the birth certificate? Lucy lowered her head. He destroyed it. He said that child didn't deserve his last name. Clara looked at her seriously. We'll start with a paternity and support lawsuit. Do you have proof that you were married? Lucy pulled out a torn folder. There was a photo from her wedding, a simple copy of the marriage certificate, and a couple of receipts in both their names. This works for now, but you need an official genetic test. Lucy swallowed. They already did one. It came out negative. He said it wasn't his child. Clara raised her eyebrows. And you're sure you weren't with anyone else? Lucy lifted her wounded gaze. I don't remember anything. Just one night I felt strange, like something wasn't right. But I didn't do anything. The lawyer nodded. She didn't ask more. There are things that hurt more than a result. I'm going to help you. I don't promise miracles, but I do promise justice. ## Chapter 4, The Patriarch's Shadow. At the Whitmore mansion, the atmosphere had become dense. The press was starting to pressure. Some media wanted to know why a baby had been publicly rejected by such an influential family. Social media didn't forgive. The Whitmore name was beginning to be linked to scandal. Stephen, desperate to clean his image, ordered a media control campaign. He bought headlines, silenced local media, hired digital reputation experts. But inside the house, the tension couldn't be hidden. Mr. Richard Whitmore, Stephen's father, had returned from a business trip, always elegant, always with his measured smile. He was one of those men who didn't shout, but with a single look could make an entire room tremble. Stephen received him in the study. Father, I need to know if anyone in the family did something with Lucy. Mr. Richard looked at him steadily. What do you mean? You know what I mean. She insists she wasn't with anyone. The DNA doesn't match me, but the doctor says there's compatibility with someone close. Did you see anything? Mr. Richard maintained his calm. Your weakness is making you talk nonsense. Stop looking for excuses in your matrimonial failure. That woman doesn't deserve another minute of our time. Stephen swallowed. You can't ignore it. Something doesn't add up. Thomas was here when I wasn't. The chauffeur too. Mr. Richard interrupted him with a firm voice. Don't drag your brother into this. He's just a boy. If you were naive enough to let a stranger into this family, assume the consequences. From the door, Thomas listened in silence. Then he went downstairs, went to look for his mother, Mrs. Margaret, and said in a low voice, Mom, do you remember Victoria? Mrs. Margaret tensed immediately. Why do you mention that woman? Because Dad has worse secrets than Lucy's situation. You know it. What he did to Victoria was worse. But everyone fell silent. Mrs. Margaret turned pale. Shut up. Don't you dare talk about that. That story died years ago. Thomas shook his head. It didn't die, it was just buried. Like everything in this house. That night, Lucy took Matthew to a private clinic that offered solidarity consultations. He was seen by the same doctor who had seen her at the public hospital, Dr. Martinez. He was surprised to see her there but said nothing. After examining him carefully, he sat in front of Lucy with a grave gesture. The child has a mitochondrial disorder. It's a rare, hereditary condition. It affects cellular energy, neurological development. It's progressive. He needs specialized treatment. Lucy felt faint. Can he die? Not if we act quickly, but the treatment is expensive and long. How much? The doctor hesitated. More than 15,000. Just to start. Lucy didn't respond, just hugged her son. I don't have that money. There's another option. If we find a compatible relative, we could start alternative therapy. Lucy looked up. A compatible relative. We need to analyze the DNA of possible fathers. If we find someone with a specific genetic match, we could work with that. Lucy closed her eyes, felt the world spinning, remembered everything, the rejection, abandonment, contempt. What if the only compatible one is in a family that hates me? The doctor looked at her with compassion. Then you'll have to decide if you face that hate or let silence consume everything. That night in her small room, Lucy looked at Matthew while he slept. Next to her, the envelope with genetic results that she herself had requested with Clara's help. She opened it with trembling hands, read it word by word. The result wasn't the same as the hospital's. The new report said something more. There was a match, but not with Stephen, with another member of the Whitmore family. Lucy dropped the paper. The world went dark, and for the first time she felt that her story was barely the surface of a much deeper abyss. Because if what that paper said was true, then the real father of her son wasn't just someone close to Stephen. It was someone who had destroyed many lives before hers. ## Chapter 5, The Truth Unveiled. Lucy dropped the envelope. It fell to the floor without making noise, but the impact was as real as if the world had exploded inside that small room. The air became dense, unbreathable. The image of Mr. Richard Whitmore appeared in her mind like an old shadow, elegant, with that refined smile that hid something dark, something she hadn't wanted to see. The genetic match left no doubts. It wasn't a supposition, it was data. The real father of Matthew lived behind the windows of a mansion she had once called home and bore his same last name. Lucy pressed Matthew against her chest, as if the warmth of his body could protect him from what was to come. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She remained still, feeling a void she didn't know how to fill. For the first time, she wasn't just a victim of abandonment, but of the complicit silence of an entire family. And that silence, she understood now, was the cruelest enemy. That same night, she requested a meeting with Clara, the lawyer who was helping her. I can't keep quiet anymore, she said while placing the envelope with results on the table of the small office. Clara read it in silence. She didn't blink, said nothing for long seconds. Mr. Richard Whitmore, she finally murmured. Lucy nodded, her gaze empty. What are you going to do? Clara asked. Lucy didn't respond immediately, then raised her head. I'm going to look for Mrs. Margaret. She knows. She always knew. The next day, she showed up unannounced at the mansion. The guard hesitated, but seeing her with a firm face carrying her son, he let her pass. She walked through the impeccable garden, through the hallways she had once walked with illusions, until she reached the main living room. Mrs. Margaret was sitting having tea with her sister. Seeing her, she twisted her lips. What audacity to show yourself here after all the damage you've done to this family. Lucy didn't flinch. I need to talk to you. Alone. Margaret's sister got up without saying a word. The tension filled the air. The matriarch left her cup on the plate with a slow gesture. You have 5 minutes. I'm not here about your son. I'm here about yours, about the other one. Margaret blinked. The silence became icy. I know that the real father of my son is Mr. Richard. I have it confirmed. And you knew it. What are you insinuating? She tried to say, but Lucy interrupted her. I'm not insinuating, I'm stating. And you're going to help me because this isn't just about me. Mrs. Margaret stood up. Her hands trembled, barely perceptible. You don't know what you're saying. You have no idea what it means to accuse a man like my husband. Lucy didn't back down. Victoria didn't know what she was doing when she screamed either. Or was she also silenced with money? Margaret's eyes opened wide. That name, that memory that had remained locked like a corpse at the bottom of memory. How do you know that name? Thomas mentioned it. And there's a pattern. Your husband isn't new to this, and your silence makes you an accomplice. Margaret stepped back, staggering. Then she let herself fall into the armchair, as if the weight of years of secrets fell on her all at once. Victoria was a young girl. She worked here. One day she disappeared. They said she left without notice. But I knew it wasn't true. I saw her cry. I saw her bruises. I saw how she avoided Richard. I knew. But I was afraid. Lucy said nothing, just observed her. Richard warned me that if I spoke, he would destroy everything, my children, me. And I believed him because he always keeps his threats. And that's why you allowed him to repeat the same thing with me? Margaret lowered her head. The silence was her answer. That night, Lucy and Clara investigated Victoria. There were no recent records, just a police report for voluntary disappearance, closed months later for lack of evidence. Clara connected to a medical database. They spent hours until they found something. A patient named Victoria Dominguez. Diagnosis: unspecified psychosis. Hospitalized in a private clinic outside the city. A psychiatric clinic? Lucy said incredulously. Forced confinement. If she's been there since then, she's been interned for more than 4 years. This isn't coincidental. They decided to go the next day. Clara made the arrangements. She used her lawyer title to access, though only as a superficial visit. They couldn't reveal the real reasons yet. Lucy waited in the car. From the window, she saw nurses, doctors, patients walking in circles pass by. The place had high bars and cameras in every corner. It wasn't a hospital, it was a white prison. Clara returned after an hour with misty eyes. She doesn't speak, doesn't move. They have her medicated all the time. She has marks on her arms. Like she had tried to. She couldn't finish the sentence. Lucy lowered her head. The air became heavy. She's alive, but no longer free. Like me. ## Chapter 6, Breaking the Silence. That same week, a journalist who had been following the case for some time published a leaked audio. It was an old recording without date, without context. A distressed female voice could be heard screaming. He drugged me. I didn't want to, I couldn't move. Please help me. Social media exploded. Some said it was fake, others assured they recognized the voice. Clara managed to trace the origin. It was part of a series of medical files from the same clinic where Victoria was. Someone had sold the audio for money. Someone who no longer worked there. Lucy listened to the audio 3 times. The 3rd time her blood froze. It was her voice. Clara understood too. She said nothing, just looked at her. Stephen in his office heard it for the first time on his phone that came to him with an anonymous link. He put it on speaker. When he heard that scream, that broken tone, that desperation, he felt something break inside him. He closed his eyes, visualized the memory. The night he left on a business trip. He was abroad, and before leaving, he told his father that Lucy would stay alone in the house. Dad was that night alone with her. The glass he had in his hand fell to the floor and shattered. The echo of the glass was the same echo that rumbled in his head, and then he understood everything. The echo of that scream continued tormenting Stephen's mind while the images organized like cursed pieces that finally fit together. The business trip. The night Lucy stayed alone at home. His father's insistence that everything would be fine. Lucy's expression weeks later, when something inside her had changed. The silent rejection, the distance, the constant sadness. Stephen was breathing with difficulty, as if the air itself betrayed him. He walked to the bathroom, washed his face, looked in the mirror, and didn't recognize himself. In his reflection wasn't the elegant man who used to control everything with a smile. There was a betrayed son, a blind husband, a defeated human being. He took the keys, went down the stairs, walked through the marble hallways without greeting anyone. His mother called him from the living room, but he didn't respond. He crossed the door of Mr. Richard's study without knocking. The patriarch was standing, serving himself whiskey as if the world owed him reverence. He looked up calmly. "You have no manners, son." Stephen closed the door. The tension in the room was so thick it seemed physical. "What did you do to her?" Mr. Richard didn't respond. "I'm going to repeat it only once more. What did you do to Lucy?" The silence was long, a prepotent silence. Then Mr. Richard drank a sip of his cup and spoke with chilling serenity. "Everything I've given you I did to tame you. You were always weak, Stephen. You weren't born to lead this family. You lacked character, you had too many emotions." Stephen took a step toward him, trembling. "You drugged her. You touched her without her being able to defend herself. Is that what you did? Don't raise your voice. Answer." Mr. Richard looked at him without flinching. "She was just another pawn. I wanted to show you that you can't trust anyone. Not women, not your judgment. And I succeeded. Because you fell as always." Stephen stepped back as if he'd been hit in the chest. He felt nauseous. Repulsion. His own father had destroyed the woman he loved just to humiliate him. "You're sick. I'm in control. What's different? You don't have control of anything. Because I'm going to sink you with everything you are, with everything you represent." Mr. Richard let out a short, dry laugh. "And do you think people are going to believe you, a spoiled child, rather than me? Do you know how many judges owe me favors? How many media depend on my money? Stephen clenched his fists. Well, they're going to find out everything because I am going to speak. And he left. He didn't look back, didn't listen to the threats. He closed the door forcefully and left as if the mansion had become a cage of fire. ## Chapter 7. Confrontation and Truth. When Stephen arrived at the neighborhood where Lucy lived, he didn't know whether to knock or simply kneel. Mrs. Martha opened the door with suspicion. What are you doing here? I need to talk to her. She doesn't want to see you or hear you. And she's right. Stephen swallowed. His voice broke. Please. Mrs. Martha hesitated, then stepped aside. Lucy was in the room feeding Matthew. Seeing him, she stood up with the child in her arms. Her eyes filled with contained fury. What are you doing here? Stephen took a step and then stopped. He looked different, defeated. I came to ask your forgiveness. Your forgiveness is no use to me. Lucy, I know everything now. I heard the audio. I talked to him. He confessed it to me. What he did to you, what he did to me. He couldn't continue. His voice broke completely. Lucy felt a knot in her chest. She knew without needing him to say more, but she couldn't allow herself to feel compassion. Not yet. And now you come here to redeem yourself. After leaving me alone in a delivery room, after shouting at me in front of everyone, after allowing your mother to call me an opportunist, now it hurts? There's no excuse for any of that. I know. But I'm here because I want to help you. I want to help you and my son. Lucy trembled. He's not your son. He's my son, even if he doesn't carry my blood. Because what they did to him is unforgivable. And I'm not going to keep quiet about it. Lucy collapsed on the bed with the child in her arms. Tears came out like a torrent, deep, tired, almost without strength. Stephen wanted to approach, but she raised her hand. Don't come closer. I need time. Stephen nodded. He left without saying more. Clara, the lawyer, was preparing the complaint. She knew she was touching someone with power, but she didn't care. The file was thick, including medical exams, genetic tests, recordings, Victoria's history, and indirect testimonies. This is going to explode, but you can't back down, she told Lucy while they reviewed the documents. I won't. They're going to attack you. They'll say you did it for money, for revenge, for fame. Lucy looked her in the eyes. I don't care what they say. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for all those who couldn't speak. The media found out. Some supported the complaint, others ridiculed it, but the story began to gain strength. Several women began writing to Clara anonymously. They had worked in powerful families' homes. Some said Mr. Richard had also harassed them, but they were afraid to speak. The legal team filed the formal complaint. The press surrounded the courthouse. The photograph of Lucy leaving with her son in her arms traveled through networks, newspapers, and television channels. Days later, Mr. Richard sent a message. He wanted to speak with Lucy privately. Clara prohibited it, but Lucy decided to go. They met at a private restaurant. He arrived with his usual elegance. She arrived with a serene but firm face. You have guts, he said. I have memory, and I have a son who deserves justice. That child isn't your shield, he's my motivation. And the reflection of what you did, whether you like it or not, is now in your life forever. Mr. Richard looked at her for a long time, then smiled. I can take the child from you. I have the resources, the contacts, the lawyers. With a couple of signatures, I can get custody. Claim that you don't have means, that you have emotional imbalance. Do you really want to play this? Lucy didn't blink. Try it, but I swear if you do, I'll make public every detail, every victim, every audio. You won't be able to walk down the street without being looked at as what you are. Mr. Richard took his cup, drank, then got up without saying more. Stephen called a press conference. Clara, Lucy, and other media were present. Microphones, cameras, reporters. The world was watching. Stephen went up to the podium, took a deep breath, and spoke. I come to speak as a son, as a husband, and as a victim of silence. The father of my wife's son is my own father, and it's not the first time he's done this. There was a collective murmur, shouts, camera flashes. What happened to Lucy was an act of violence, of power, of perversion. And I, as part of that family, can't continue to keep quiet. The media exploded, networks collapsed, Mr. Richard's figure stopped being untouchable, and thus the silence was broken. ## Chapter 8. The Trial of Truth. Stephen's words still echoed in the courthouse corridors, in newsrooms, and in internet forums like a bomb no one saw coming. The image of the heir to one of the country's most powerful families, confessing that his father had committed an unimaginable crime and that the child he himself had rejected was the fruit of that monstrosity, crossed borders. It was international news, headlines, covers, divided reactions. Some applauded his courage, others called him a coward for having kept quiet so long. But Lucy didn't have time to debate the media impact. She was focused on one thing: justice. Together with Clara, her lawyer, she appeared before the district attorney's office, accompanied by cameras, journalists, and several women who had also suffered, but until now didn't dare to speak. Lucy carried Matthew in her arms, as always. She was thinner, her face marked by exhaustion, but her eyes were bright. She no longer feared, no longer hid. Clara raised the formal complaint against Mr. Richard Whitmore with all possible legal backing. It included testimonies, documents, genetic results, the leaked audio, and the recording of the confession that Stephen had secretly obtained days before while talking to his father. The evidence was clear. Although the law sometimes bent to protect the powerful, this time they were going to force it to look directly. The press conference was called at the courthouse entrance. Clara took the microphone while Lucy held Matthew. Today we're not just reporting a crime. We're reporting a structure of impunity that has protected for decades a man capable of destroying entire lives with a smile. We're not going to keep quiet. We're not going to back down. When Lucy took the floor, the silence was total. For years I believed I had done something wrong, that I deserved the rejection, the looks, the closed doors. But it wasn't my fault. And today I want other women to hear this. It wasn't your fault either. He didn't just take away a life from me. He stole the possibility of being a mother with dignity. But he's not going to take away my strength. That same day, Clara presented a list of women willing to testify. Some were still afraid, others didn't want to show their faces, but the accounts coincided. Repeated patterns, strange invitations, dizziness, memory gaps, confused awakenings, months of silence. All connected to Mr. Richard, all invisibilized by power. And then the unexpected happened. Victoria appeared. Not as the cheerful young woman who had once worked at the mansion, but as a fragile figure with a pale face, short hair, and trembling hands. She had escaped from the psychiatric hospital with help from a nurse who decided to stop being an accomplice. Clara received her at her house, gave her clean clothes, and protected her as if she were her own sister. Lucy hugged her with tears in her eyes. Victoria didn't speak for a long time, but when she finally did, her broken but firm voice made everything tremble. He locked me up so no one would know. He told me no one would believe me, that I was crazy, and I started to believe him until I saw Lucy on the news and understood that he kept destroying lives. With Victoria as a key witness, the prosecutor ordered the immediate arrest of Mr. Richard. Police arrived at his mansion with live cameras. They took him out handcuffed, with dark glasses and an expression of absolute disdain. He didn't resist. He looked at the journalists as if they were ants. Still, the moment was historic. A Whitmore arrested publicly. But it didn't last. After 72 hours, he was released on a legal technicality, alleged insufficient direct evidence. The judge in charge was an old acquaintance of Mr. Richards. Social media exploded. Public opinion was divided between indignation and incredulity. Stephen shouted to the cameras that the system was rotten, that if his father went free, no one would be safe. Lucy felt like the world was laughing in her face again, but this time she didn't collapse. She organized a march with Clara and other victims. They didn't just want judicial justice, they wanted social justice. They wanted the entire country to look at that monster with his face uncovered. The march was called for the following Sunday. Women, mothers, daughters, activists, journalists, artists joined. Thousands united with sharp banners, photos of victims, names that had been in the shadows for years. Lucy marched at the front with Matthew in her arms. She walked with tears in her eyes, but without lowering her head. The impact was immediate. Television networks transmitted live. Some public figures spoke out. Local governments showed their support. For the first time, Mr. Richard couldn't manipulate the narrative. People didn't believe him. Networks didn't shut up. The country was awake. But while the world watched, Matthew was getting worse. The fever wouldn't go down. His body was weakening. He didn't want to eat. Lucy ran to the nearest hospital. Dr. Martinez received her. "We need to operate on him now." "How urgent?" "Hours. If we don't intervene, there could be irreversible damage." "I don't have the money. I have $500 left." "No more." The doctor looked at her with compassion. "Then get it however you can." Lucy ran out. She looked for Clara. They looked for foundations. None could respond so quickly. The hospital asked for a minimum advance of $12,000. Desperate, Lucy recorded a video. She didn't ask for money, she just told the story. She showed Matthew, explained the urgency, published it on social media. Within hours, people reacted. Anonymous people, celebrities, artists, mothers, students. A wave of solidarity was activated. The story was already too well known. They couldn't allow Matthew to pay with his life for what another man had done. The campaign went viral. In less than 24 hours, the account raised more than $70,000. Stephen, upon finding out, sold his stake in a tech company he had founded years ago. He delivered the money without announcing it, without cameras, without pretensions. "Do what you have to do," he told Clara. "I just want the child to be okay." Lucy, upon finding out, said nothing. She remained silent, but in her eyes there was something new. Not trust, not love, gratitude. The operation was a success. Matthew responded well. Doctors reported that with continued treatment, he could lead a stable life. It wouldn't be easy, but there was hope. That night, Lucy fell asleep in the hospital chair with Matthew's hand in hers. She dreamed of a quiet house with laughter, with a simple life. For the first time, she dreamed without fear. ## Chapter 9, The Final Confrontation. But the monster hadn't disappeared. Mr. Richard, since his release, had been pulling strings. He knew his time was shortening, that pressure was increasing, that the system no longer covered his back like before. He organized his escape. He got false documents, a land route to another country, private escorts. He planned everything with surgical precision. It was his style, to do everything in silence, without noise, without leaving traces. What he didn't know was that his own son, Stephen, had put a private investigator behind him. They were following his movements, waiting for the exact moment to intervene. The alert came to Clara. Clara called Lucy. Lucy called the police. The plan was simple. Mr. Richard would leave the country that night. He would travel abroad using a false identity. The airport was the key point. They had to act there, an hour before boarding. Lucy didn't hesitate. She took a taxi, went to the airport. She didn't notify the press, didn't seek spectacle, just justice. She found him in the VIP line with a false passport and 2 escorts. He looked at her. She looked at him. Again. "You," he said with arrogance. Lucy didn't respond. She turned, and then 2 police officers arrived, along with a judge and a prosecutor. Mr. Richard Whitmore was formally detained for attempted flight, document fraud, and violation of conditional liberty. This time he wouldn't get out so easily. He smiled one last time. The world is full of traitors. Lucy looked at him steadily. It's full of women who stopped being afraid. And so the monster fell. ## Chapter 10, Justice Served. Mr. Richard was handcuffed in front of cameras, surrounded by security agents and witnesses to his fall. His gaze, for the first time, was no longer haughty, it was empty. There was no longer any power to protect him. His world, built on fear, manipulation, and silence, collapsed with the force of a truth he couldn't crush. The entire country watched, some with incredulity, others with relief, many with fury. It was the end of an era where the powerful could trample without consequences. Justice finally walked without being sold. The trial was long, public, televised. Dozens of witnesses, experts, doctors, psychologists, journalists, women. Voices that had been buried for years came to light with the trembling of those who don't know if they'll be believed, but with the courage of those who can no longer keep quiet. Among them, Victoria. Her testimony paralyzed the courtroom. She spoke with a trembling but clear voice. She described hell with details no one could ignore. Every word was a slap to the system. Lucy also testified. She held Matthew in her arms while speaking. She didn't dramatize. She didn't cry. She spoke like a mother who no longer has fear. She said everything from the day she woke up confused to the moment she heard the audio where her own voice could be heard begging for help. She told how the Whitmore family accused her, abandoned her, humiliated her. She looked at each judge, each lawyer. She didn't ask for compassion, she demanded justice. The verdict came after weeks of deliberation. Mr. Richard Whitmore was declared guilty of multiple crimes, including aggravated rape, coercion, evidence tampering, fraud, and attempted flight. The sentence was clear: life imprisonment without possibility of reduction. The country celebrated. Some voices still doubted, influenced by decades of media power, but the majority understood that something had changed, that it was no longer possible to keep quiet when a single victim decided to speak. Candles were lit in plazas, handkerchiefs hung from balconies. Lucy wasn't the only one who won. They all won. ## Epilogue, New Beginnings. Matthew, meanwhile, was recovering. The operation had been successful. His little body responded well to treatment. Doctors were optimistic. Stephen visited him every day. He didn't talk much. Sometimes he just sat beside him, took his small hand, and watched him sleep. It was his way of asking forgiveness, not with words, but with presence. Lucy noticed. She also noticed that he was no longer the same. The Stephen from the mansion, arrogant, distant, controlling, had disappeared. What remained was a broken man, but willing to rebuild himself from the ruins. One morning, when Matthew was about to be discharged, Stephen asked to speak with her alone. They sat on a bench facing the hospital garden. The air smelled of wet earth and flowers someone had forgotten to water. "I know I can never erase what I did to you," he said, looking down. "You can't," Lucy responded firmly. "But I want you to know I'm not leaving. Not as a couple. I'm not here to recover that, but as someone who understands the damage he caused and is willing to live with the weight of that damage for the rest of his life." Lucy observed him for a long time, then sighed. "Sometimes forgiving is letting go, and I don't want to carry you anymore. Not out of hate, but because I want to walk light." He nodded. He didn't insist. And she hugged him briefly, like someone saying goodbye to something that was important but no longer belongs. With Matthew's health stabilized and Mr. Richards' sentence firm, Lucy decided it was time to do something more. She couldn't allow her story to become just another case that time erases. She had to tell it, not for herself but for those who couldn't. She began writing, first on loose papers. Then Clara gave her a hardcover notebook to fill with what broke you and also what saved you. Lucy titled the manuscript with the name that had accompanied her since the first time she felt something didn't fit: The Child of Silence. The book was published 6 months later. It was edited by a small independent publisher. At first, they didn't expect great repercussion, but on its launch day, Lucy's name became trending. The book sold out in a few hours. Reviews called it brave, necessary, heartbreaking. It wasn't a story written to move. It was a warning, a testimony, an act of memory. With the royalties, Lucy founded an organization for women victims of abuse and power violence. She called it the Matthew Foundation, not for the child, but for what he represented: a life born from horror that became a symbol of hope. It offered free legal assistance, emotional recovery workshops, temporary shelter, and medical guidance. Women came from everywhere with fear, with wounds, but with the certainty that they were no longer alone. Victoria was one of the first volunteers. Clara became her legal ally. Mrs. Martha became a kind of honorary godmother. Stephen collaborated silently, organizing donations, using his contacts without seeking prominence. Lucy became a public figure despite not wanting to. She was invited to conferences, universities, television programs, but only accepted when she knew she could speak with sincerity, without makeup, without prefabricated speeches. Her story wasn't a product, it was an open wound she had decided not to hide anymore. Years passed. Matthew grew surrounded by love. He didn't ask much at first. He was a curious, happy child with contagious laughter and precocious intelligence. He knew his story was special, that his mother was strong, and that somehow his existence had changed many people's lives. When he turned 6, Lucy wrote him a letter. *Dear son, you were born in silence, but your voice has awakened the world. I didn't raise you to be brave because you already are that. I raised you to be free, to understand that your origin doesn't define you. What defines you is the love you give and receive. And you, Matthew, have been my greatest lesson in love. The last scene occurred on a warm March afternoon. The sky had a clean, almost unreal blue. Lucy was walking down a path surrounded by trees with Matthew in her arms. He was no longer a baby, but he liked to hug her like when he was small. She lifted him, rested him on her hip, and looked at the sky. She said nothing for several seconds. Matthew caressed her face. "Are you okay, Mom?" She smiled. Not with sadness, but with peace. "The pain broke me, but you rebuilt me." And they continued walking. What did you think of this story? There are many people who, like Lucy, are living silent battles every day. Our hope is that their voice has also resonated within you. If this story touched your heart, share it. Make more people feel accompanied. Be part of the change.